For many churches, the month of October is a month of stewardship emphasis. And I have to confess, it's tempting to use this story from Luke 17 as a stewardship illustration. It's a story about 10 lepers who are healed, only one of whom comes back to thank Jesus. Can you see how easy it would be to turn it into a sermon about tithing? About the $10 bills that go out through the congregation into the world, and the one that comes back to praise God and fall down at Jesus' feet. It would be easy. It would be almost too easy. But I don't think that's what this passage is really about. And although it would be a perfect time to talk about the joys of stewardship and the biblical principle of the tithe, I don't want to twist this passage into some other shape just to help us meet the annual budget. So, what is this passage really about? Well, it's about Jesus, who is on his way to Jerusalem. On the way, he travels through the region between Samaria and Galilee and enters a village where he encounters 10 lepers. 10, you say? 10 lepers? Doesn't that seem like a lot? Well, it does, but you need to remember that in those days, people referred to a lot of diseases as leprosy. Almost any disease that affected the skin, really. These 10 may have suffered from something as common as psoriasis or shingles, but it didn't matter. As long as they had the disease, they were considered lepers and had to abide by the rigid rules prescribed in Leviticus 13, where it says, "The person who has the leprous disease shall wear torn clothes, and let the hair of his head be disheveled. And he shall cover his upper lip and cry out, 'Unclean, unclean.' He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp." It was some of these people, some of these dirty, lonely, leprous people, who approached Jesus and begged him, "Master, have mercy on us." Can you picture them? 10 of them standing there all in a row, a short stone's throw from Jesus, with their ragged clothes and disheveled hair, all of them begging for mercy. It would have been a pitiful sight. And who knows how long he stood there looking at them before he was moved with compassion and told them to go and show themselves to the priests. But here's the good part. Luke says that as they went, they were made clean. And we need to pause long enough to appreciate what that would have meant. As they went to wherever they could find a priest, maybe in that same little village, they were made clean. Which is to say that those diseased places on their bodies, those angry bumps and purple lumps and open weeping sores, were gone forever. And their skin was like new again. Any princess who has had a pimple on prom night can imagine what it would be like to look in the mirror a second time and find that the pimple was gone, that her skin had become as smooth and silky as a Cosmo cover girl's. Now, multiply that feeling by 100, by 1,000, and you will have some sense of what it was like for these lepers to look down and see that their ravaged and disease-ridden flesh had been healed, that there weren't even any scars there, just smooth, firm, beautiful skin. What it would mean is not only that your body was whole again, but that in a very real sense, your life was whole again too. You could show yourself to the priest, be pronounced clean, go home, take off those filthy rags, and soak in a long, hot bath. You could wash your hair twice, work in some conditioner, rinse off in warm, running water. You could dry yourself with a thick, fluffy towel, put on some lavender-scented lotion, put on some clean clothes, and move back into your old room again. Life would begin again for you. Life. But among those 10 lepers, only one of them seemed to grasp the significance of what had happened. Luke says that when he looked down and saw that he had been healed, he turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He found Jesus and fell at his feet and thanked him. And then Luke adds, as if it were something more than just an interesting detail, and he was a Samaritan. Now, maybe you know all you need to know about Samaritans. Maybe you know that they were despised by the Jews. As the writer of John's Gospel once explained, Jews and Samaritans didn't have anything to do with each other. If so, then you can imagine how surprising it would be to find this former Samaritan leper stretched out at the feet of the Jewish Jesus, thanking him and praising God in a loud voice. But what surprises Jesus really is not that he is a Samaritan, but that he is the only one who came back to say thank you. Were not 10 made clean, he asks, looking around? The other 9, where are they? I don't know. Maybe they thought they were entitled to a little healing. They were presumably Jews, God's chosen people. Perhaps they thought that Jesus, as God's representative, was only giving them what they deserved, a little divine healing. Why not go on then and show themselves to the priest, as Jesus had commanded, so they could get back to their old lives as quickly as possible? But this Samaritan doesn't feel entitled. He's an outsider. Outside of Israel, outside of God's favor, outside of the realm of possibility until this impossible thing happens. And then he can't help but give thanks. I noticed as I studied this passage last week that leprosy, like most diseases, doesn't discriminate. It afflicts Jews and Samaritans alike. And Jesus doesn't discriminate. He sends all 10 lepers to the priest, and on the way, all 10 of them are healed. The only time things get lopsided in this story is when the lepers are healed. Then only one of them, a Samaritan, comes back to thank Jesus, while the other 9 disappear, never to be heard from again. It often seems to work this way, that people with the least hope of having anything are the ones who are most grateful when they get it. I remember the time I gave one of our homeless neighbors more than I meant to. I thought I had a dollar bill in my pocket, so I reached in there, pulled it out, and handed it over without looking. It turned out to be a 20, but by then I couldn't really ask for it back. The man looked at the bill, looked up at me, and said, "I love you." The Samaritan, when he was healed, responded in a similar way. Listen to the verbs in this passage. He saw that he was healed. He turned back. He fell at Jesus' feet. He praised God in a loud voice and thanked Jesus for what he had done. What did these others do? As far as we know, nothing. They behave as if someone had just handed them 27 cents. And Jesus, who is hardly ever surprised by human behavior, seems surprised by this. Were not 10 made clean? The other 9, where are they? Where indeed? We don't know. But we do know what Jesus said to the one who came back. He said, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Did you hear that? Jesus doesn't say your faith has made you clean. He says your faith has made you well. It's a different word than the word that was used earlier. It's the word sozo, which in Greek can mean not only well or whole, but also saved. Luke says that on the way to see the priest, all 10 lepers were made clean, but at the end of the story, only one of them was saved. This one, the one who came back. And the difference between being clean and being saved seems to have everything to do with his response. When he saw that he was clean, he turned back, praised God, and thanked Jesus. He acknowledged that his healing hadn't just happened, someone had made it happen, and that someone needed to be thanked. Afterward, Jesus says, your faith has saved you, by which I think he meant that in his recognition of God's role in his healing, in his gratitude for what God had done for him, this leper was redrawing the lines of right relationship between himself and his Maker, so that in the end he wasn't only clean, he was saved. Saved by a thank you. Which brings me around, finally, to us. I've been thinking about how, like leprosy, sin does not discriminate. It afflicts us all. And I've been thinking about how, just like in this story, Jesus doesn't discriminate. He offers salvation to everyone. The only time things seem to get lopsided is when we are saved. Some people, like the Samaritan, are profoundly grateful, while others, like those 9 who never came back, are not. Suppose, for example, that you grew up in one of those churches where the preacher talked about hell till you could almost smell the sulfur and feel the hot flames licking at your feet. Suppose you went forward one Sunday to receive Jesus as your Lord and Savior because you didn't want to end up there. If you really believed that you had been delivered from eternal damnation, from roasting in the fires of hell forever, don't you think you would be grateful? Don't you think you would spend some part of every day simply sobbing with gratitude? Or suppose you grew up in one of those churches where hell wasn't a hot place at all, but a cold one, where it was separation from God. If you don't think that's just as bad as the alternative, imagine what it would be like to spend eternity cut off from the one who is the source of all light and life and love, leaving you to wallow forever not in the opposite of those things, but in the absence of them, in darkness and lifelessness and loneliness. If you had been saved from all of that, or even if you only believed that Jesus had brought you into relationship with God so that you wouldn't have to be separated from Him any longer, so that you found yourself now and forever in His loving, life-giving, light-filled presence, wouldn't you be grateful? Wouldn't you wrap your arms around Jesus' ankles and wet His feet with your tears? How is it then that so many of us who have been saved in one way or another seem so ungrateful for what we've received? This wasn't intended to be a stewardship sermon, but I remember something a church member said to me years ago. He said that when he and his wife got married, they agreed to tithe. That is, to send $1 bill out of every 10 running back to thank Jesus. And one of the reasons they did it was because they were afraid not to. We weren't afraid that God would stop giving or that He would take away everything we have, he said. We were just afraid of what kind of people we would become if we didn't. And that's the part that stuck with me. We were afraid of what kind of people we would become. We were afraid, in other words, that we would become ungrateful people. And that's what I think Jesus was talking about. We don't know what became of those 9 other lepers, but we know what became of this one. When Jesus healed him, He came back to say thank you. And as He did, he became a different person. He not only got his old life back, he got a whole new life. He wasn't only healed, he was saved. That church member told me something about regular giving reminds my wife and me that none of what we have is ours, that it all comes from God, and He's simply letting us use it for a while. And then he said this, tithing for us is a tangible way of saying thank you to God. Thanks is one of those words that is easy to say but hard to do. Tithing gives us a way to do something, to put some action behind that feeling. Do you remember what that leper did? He did 5 things. He saw that he was healed. He turned back. He fell at Jesus' feet. He praised God in a loud voice and thanked Jesus for what He had done. He put some action behind his feeling. I don't know where you go to church. I don't know if your church is behind in its annual giving or how far, but I hope this sermon will inspire you to write one of the most generous checks you have ever written. It's not only about what your giving can do for the church, it's about what your gratitude can do for you. In a very real sense, it can save your life.